They say you can tell everything about a house by the way it breathes when you're not making any noise. Most houses just settle. The wood expands, the pipes hum, the attic sighs under the weight of the wind. But this house didn't just settle. It waited. I found it on a last-minute rental site, a charming colonial tucked away at the end of a gravel road in a town whose name I'd already forgotten by the time I crossed the county line. I was looking for silence. I was looking for a place where I could disappear for a month, finish my work, and pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. I got exactly what I asked for, and that was my first mistake. Because when you're completely alone, the silence doesn't just surround you. It starts to look for gaps in your sanity. And it wasn't long before I realized that I wasn't the only thing taking up space inside these four walls. There was a presence here, something heavy and cold that didn't show up in the listing photos, and it was coming from beneath my feet. The first few days were unremarkable, or at least I tried to convince myself they were. The house was drafty, sure. The floorboards groaned with every step, and the light bulbs had a habit of flickering at the exact moment you needed them most. Standard old house charm. But then there was the smell. It didn't hit me all at once. It started as a faint, sweet rot, the kind you'd expect from a mouse that had crawled into the drywall to die. I ignored it. I bought candles. I opened the windows, letting the damp autumn air pull the heat out of the rooms. But the smell didn't leave. It grew. It became thicker, more physical, until it felt like a film coating the back of my throat every time I took a breath. It was a cloying, organic stench that reminded me of things that have been forgotten for too long. By the fourth night, I couldn't ignore the source any longer. It wasn't the walls. It wasn't the vents. It was coming from the basement door, a heavy, scarred piece of oak tucked under the staircase, held shut by a padlock that looked like it hadn't been touched in a decade. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself the landlord probably just kept some old gardening supplies or wet insulation down there. But the logic didn't hold. If it was just insulation, why the padlock? If it was just old furniture, why did the air around the doorframe feel 10 degrees colder than the rest of the hallway? I spent 3 hours that night just staring at that lock, a glass of whiskey in my hand, listening to the house. Every creak of the rafters sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind against the siding sounded like a whispered warning. The isolation was starting to warp my perspective, turning a simple basement door into a gateway to something I wasn't ready to face. But the smell was a demand. It was a silent scream for attention, and eventually, the curiosity became more painful than the fear. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a heavy screwdriver and a hammer, and walked back to that door. The lock didn't put up much of a fight. The metal was brittle with rust, snapping with a sharp, dry crack that echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for something to happen. Silence. Just the steady, rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet somewhere in the kitchen. I pulled the door open. The darkness that rolled out of that basement was absolute. It wasn't just an absence of light, it was a weight. I fanned the air, the stench nearly doubling in intensity, making my eyes water and my stomach roll. I reached for the light switch on the wall, clicked it, and nothing. Of course. I went back for my flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow, shaky path through the gloom as I began to descend the wooden stairs. They were steep, narrow, and slick with moisture. With every step down, the temperature dropped. The air turned stagnant, tasting of iron and mold. I reached the bottom floor, packed dirt, uneven and cold. I swept the light around the room. It was mostly empty. A few rusted paint cans, a collapsed wooden shelf, a pile of old, water-damaged newspapers from the 70s. Nothing out of the ordinary. I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost laughed. "You're an idiot," I whispered to the empty room. But then, the beam of my light hit the far corner. There was a space behind the furnace, a crawl space that had been walled off with a crude lattice of plywood. And that's where the smell was coming from. It was a physical wall of rot now, so strong I had to pull my shirt over my nose just to keep from gagging. I approached the plywood. It wasn't nailed down, it was just propped up against the studs. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and pushed it aside. The flashlight beam lanced into the small, dark cavity beyond. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. There was a shape, something wrapped in a heavy, stained tarp that might have been blue once, but was now a mottled, greasy gray. It was the size of a person. My brain tried to protect me. It told me it was a rolled-up rug, a bag of old clothes, a mannequin left behind by a previous tenant. But the shape was too specific. The way the tarp slumped, the way it seemed to have settled into the dirt. It was the posture of something that had once had a pulse. I didn't run. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by a sick, hypnotic dread. I knelt in the dirt, the knees of my jeans soaking up the moisture, and I reached for the edge of the tarp. I just needed to know. If I knew, the nightmare would have a name. If I knew, I could call the police and leave this place behind. I gripped the plastic, the texture slick and cold, and I pulled. The tarp didn't slide easily. It felt heavy, bonded to whatever was inside by time and decay. I gave it a hard tug, and that's when the reality hit me. A hand. That's what I saw first, or what was left of one. Pale, waxy skin stretched tight over delicate bones, the fingernails unnaturally long, the wrist ending in a tattered sleeve of a floral print dress. It was a woman, or it had been. The beam of my flashlight caught the side of her face as the tarp fell away. She was lying on her side, her knees pulled up toward her chest in a grotesque imitation of sleep. Her hair was a matted, silver-gray web draped over the dirt. She looked like she had been there for weeks, maybe months, hidden away in the dark while the world went on without her above. The terror I felt wasn't sharp anymore. It was a dull, crushing weight. I looked around the basement, the realization sinking in that I was standing in a crime scene, and I was the only person who knew. But as I started to back away, my light caught something else, something that made my blood turn to ice. There was a bowl on the ground next to her, a small ceramic bowl, and inside it was a piece of fresh fruit, an apple, still bright red, barely a day old. Someone was tending to her. Someone was coming down here, into this dark, freezing hole, and leaving gifts for a corpse. The landlord? A neighbor? I realized then that the padlock hadn't been meant to keep people out. It was meant to keep something in, or maybe to keep the ritual a secret. I scrambled backward, tripping over a paint can, my flashlight clattering across the dirt floor. I was in the dark. For 5 agonizing seconds, I was in total, suffocating blackness, with the woman in the floral dress. I found the light, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped it again. I scrambled up the stairs, my lungs burning, my mind screaming at me to get out, get to the car, and never look back. I reached the top of the stairs, burst through the door, and slammed it shut. I leaned my back against it, gasping for air, the sweetness of the rot still lingering in my mouth. I needed my phone. It was in the kitchen. I ran across the hardwood, my socks slipping, and grabbed the device from the counter. No signal. Of course there was no signal. This was the end of the road, the dead zone I had bragged about finding. I looked out the kitchen window toward the gravel driveway. My car was there, a silver glint in the moonlight. I just had to make it 20 feet. I reached for the back door handle, but then I heard it. A sound that froze the breath in my lungs. It wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from the porch. the slow, deliberate crunch of gravel under heavy boots. Someone was walking toward the house, not in a hurry, not like they were coming to help. They were walking with the steady, practiced rhythm of someone coming home. Someone who knew exactly what was behind that padlocked door, and someone who wouldn't be happy to find the lock broken. I backed away from the door, retreating into the shadows of the hallway, my eyes fixed on the handle. It began to turn, slowly, quietly. And in that moment, I realized that finding the body wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the hunt. I stood in the darkness of the hallway, pressed against the wall so hard I could feel every imperfection of the ancient wallpaper. The doorknob continued to turn, slowly, with a rhythmic, almost tender metallic screech. Whoever was standing there, on the other side, wasn't trying to break in. They weren't lunging or shouting. It was the movement of a man opening the door to his own bedroom, where someone he was afraid to wake was sleeping. In that moment, I realized the most terrifying thing in this world isn't the dead. The dead are predictable. They lie exactly where you leave them. The most terrifying thing is the living. People with a warped internal logic, and that logic was currently 3 feet away from me. The door opened a few inches, and a gust of cold night air, thick with the scent of damp earth, rushed into the house. I held my breath. My lungs burned, screaming for oxygen, but I knew the slightest sound and I'd become a permanent part of this house. A silhouette appeared in the gap, tall, hunched, wearing a heavy raincoat that shimmered with moisture. The man stepped inside, and I heard him close the door behind him with agonizing care, almost reverently. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't have to. He knew this house by touch. I could only see his profile in the pale moonlight bleeding through the kitchen window. An old man, but not the frail kind you see in grocery lines. There was a gnarled, sinewy strength to him, like an old tree that refuses to die. He stopped in the foyer and he sniffed. That sound, a sharp intake of air through the nose, was the most chilling thing I've ever heard. Did he smell my fear? No, he smelled that the air in the house had changed. The scent of the basement, that sweet aroma of rot I had unleashed, now filled the first floor. The man slowly turned his head toward the stairs, toward the door hiding the descent to the cellar. I saw his shoulders stiffen. He knew the lock was broken. He didn't rush the door. He stood motionless for 30 seconds, a span of time that felt like an eternity in purgatory. Then he spoke. His voice was low, rustling like dry leaves. "You shouldn't have done that, son. This is private. This is family." He wasn't screaming. There was an almost paternal sadness in his voice that sent an electric jolt of horror down my spine. He began to slowly peel off his raincoat, and I heard the dull thud of something heavy he placed on the entryway table. Keys, maybe, or a flashlight, or a knife. I began to back away, trying to keep my feet on the carpet runner so the floorboards wouldn't betray me. My goal was the second floor. There was a bedroom up there with a heavy bolt and a window that, if I was lucky, led to the porch roof. But every step I took felt like a drumbeat. I reached the first step of the staircase just as I heard his footsteps. He wasn't coming for me. He was heading for the basement. I froze halfway up the stairs, looking through the banister. The old man opened the basement door. I heard him descending. One step, another, another. A dim light flickered on below. He had his own flashlight. And then something drifted up from the cellar that finally broke my spirit. He began to sing. It was a lullaby. Wordless, just a low, guttural humming, devoid of melody, but full of a twisted kind of tenderness. He was talking to her. He was apologizing to her because the guest had been impolite. I realized this was my only chance. I bolted up to the second floor, slammed into the bedroom, and threw the bolt. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped my phone twice. 0 bars, no signal. I ran to the window and tried to heave it open, but the frames were swollen with dampness and had been painted shut decades ago. I slammed my shoulder against it. The wood didn't even creak. I was trapped. A sharp noise erupted from below, the sound of something heavy hitting the dirt, and then a cry. But it wasn't human. It was the howl of a wounded animal. He had discovered that I touched the body, that I had pulled back the tarp. He knew I had desecrated his sanctuary. The humming stopped. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the pulse thundering in my temples. Then the footsteps started. Fast this time. Heavy. He was coming up from the basement. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was coming for me. I heard him cross the kitchen, heard his boots hit the first step of the stairs. Every riser groaned under his weight. "I wanted you to just leave in the morning," he shouted from below, and the sadness was gone. There was only rage now, the pure, concentrated hatred of a man whose secret had been trampled by a stranger. "I thought you were just one of those city fools who doesn't notice anything. No ty zalez w naszą жизнь. You crawled into Elisa's life." He was on the second floor landing. I pressed myself against the bedroom door, bracing it with my entire body, though I knew this flimsy piece of wood wouldn't stop him if he decided to break it down. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, my voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "I didn't see anything. I'll just go. I won't tell anyone, I swear." The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. I saw the shadow of his feet block the sliver of light from the hallway. "You already told," he whispered through the wood. "You told your eyes, and eyes don't know how to keep secrets. Only the earth knows." He kicked the door. The entire house shuddered. The bolt held, but the wood around it splintered. I scrambled back toward the bed, looking for any kind of weapon. A lamp? Too light. A heavy glass ashtray on the nightstand. That was all I had. A second kick shattered a panel of the door. I saw his eye through the jagged hole, a mad, bloodshot pupil that locked onto me with such intensity I physically felt the weight of his stare. He didn't kick a third time. Instead, I heard him doing something in the hallway. A rustle of fabric, a strange metallic clicking, and then the smell of smoke. He wasn't going to break the door down. He had decided that if I didn't want to come out, I would stay in there forever. This old man was ready to burn down his ancestral home, his Elisa, and me along with them, just to make sure the secret never left the property line. Smoke began to seep under the door, thick, black, acrid. Below me, something ignited with a roar. He must have lit the curtains or doused the stairs in gasoline. Men like him always have a stash of fuel in the shed. I lunged at the window with the ashtray in my hand. Break it. I had to break the damn glass. I swung with everything I had, but the glass was old, thick, ship-grade glass. It only let out a dull thud. Behind me, the door was already beginning to char. The heat was becoming unbearable. I struck it again, and again. On the third hit, the glass spiderwebbed, and cold air rushed into the room, instantly feeding the fire outside the door. The flames roared, tearing through the splintered wood. I leaned out the window, looking down. It was far, too far for a safe jump, and below were the jagged stones of the foundation and a tangle of thorny rose bushes. But I had no choice. I was about to swing my leg over the sill when I heard a voice directly beneath the window. "Jump then, son," he said. He was standing down there, on the grass. In his hands were a pair of long-handled garden shears, the massive kind for heavy brush, and he was looking up at me, smiling with a toothless mouth. He wasn't going to wait for me to burn. He wanted to finish it himself, on the ground, in the dark, where no one would hear my last scream. I froze between the fire and the steel. Behind me, the door was collapsing, The ceiling was turning black, and below stood the Reaper in a raincoat, ready to harvest my life. In that moment, I realized there was no escape in this story. There was only a choice of which death to take. The heat behind me is no longer a sensation, it's a living thing. I can hear the wallpaper peeling back, hissing like 1,000 snakes, and the roar of the staircase collapsing into the foyer sounds like the house itself is screaming in agony. The smoke is filling my lungs, turning my vision into a blurry, stinging haze. I look down at the old man. He hasn't moved. He's standing perfectly still in the flickering orange glow of the burning house, the garden shears held open, waiting for me to drop into his embrace. He looks patient. He looks like a man who has all the time in the world, while I have seconds. I don't jump. Not yet. I reach back into the room, shielding my face from the blistering heat, and I grab the heavy wooden nightstand. My skin is blistering. The air I'm breathing is liquid fire, but I heave the furniture toward the broken window. With one last scream of effort, I shove it through the frame. The nightstand crashes down, aimed right at his head. He's fast for his age. He sidesteps it with a gnarled grace, but it's the distraction I need. I don't jump for the grass. I lunged for the thick, ancient ivy crawling up the side of the stone chimney. My fingers claw at the vines, the rough wood and leaves tearing at my palms. I slide down, the ivy snapping and groaning under my weight, thorns ripping through my shirt. I hit the ground hard, my ankle twisting with a sickening pop. But I don't stop. I scramble into the shadows of the rose bushes, the thorns shredding my arms, as the bedroom above me finally explodes in a crown of fire. The glass shatters outward, raining down like diamonds made of heat. I look through the branches. The old man is standing by the smashed nightstand, his head tilted, searching the darkness. He knows I'm not dead. He's moving with a terrifying, predatory silence, sniffing the air again. I can hear the shears clicking. Snip, snip. The sound of a gardener trimming a hedge. Except I'm the hedge. I crawl deeper into the brush, my heart a frantic, dying bird in my chest, heading for the tree line. If I can make it to the woods, I have a chance. If I stay near the light of the fire, I'm just a target. I break cover and run. My leg is a lightning bolt of pain with every step, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I hear him behind me, a low, rhythmic thudding of boots on the turf. He's not running, he's loping. He knows the terrain. He knows where every root and rock is hidden in this dirt. I dive into the pines, the darkness swallowing me whole, and I collapse behind a rotted log, pressing my face into the wet needles to stifle my sobbing breath. For a long time, there is nothing but the distant crackle of the house burning. And then, the voice. It's right there, maybe 10 feet away. "You're a fast one, son, but you're bleeding. I can smell the iron." Elisa, she liked the smell of iron. That's why she stayed. I hear the shears bite through a branch nearby. Snip. "It wasn't a crime, you know," he continues, his voice conversational, almost gentle. "She was tired. The world out there, it was too loud for her. She wanted to be quiet. I just gave her what she asked for. I kept her beautiful. I kept her safe. And now you've gone and burnt her. You've burnt the only thing I had left." The tone shifts. The gentleness evaporates, replaced by a cold, hollow resonance that sounds like it's coming from the bottom of a well. "I'm going to find you, boy. And I'm going to bury what's left of you in the ash of that house. You'll be with her then. You'll be part of the family." I reach into the dirt, my fingers closing around a heavy, jagged stone. It's not much, but it's all I have. I wait. I listen to his footsteps, deliberate, heavy, certain. He's circling the log. He's playing with me. He wants to see the terror in my eyes one more time before the steel closes. I see the silhouette of the shears first, rising above the log like the mandibles of a giant insect. Then, his face. The fire from the house is still bright enough to light up his eyes. They look like two pieces of black glass reflecting a dying world. He lunges. I don't pull back. I throw the stone with everything I have left, catching him square in the throat. He gags, the shears clattering against the log, and I launch myself at him. We tumble into the dirt, a mess of limbs and desperation. He's stronger than he looks. His hands are like iron clamps, finding my neck, squeezing the last of the smoky air out of me. I claw at his face, my fingers finding his eyes, but he doesn't let go. The world starts to go gray at the edges, and then a sound. A long, mournful wail. The old man freezes. His grip slackens just enough for me to roll away, gasping, coughing up soot. He's not looking at me. He's looking back at the house. The roof has finally caved in, and in the wreckage, something has shifted. A massive charred beam has fallen, exposing the basement to the sky. And in the center of that fire, amidst the ruins of the colonial charm, the tarp didn't burn, it melted. The old man stands up, ignoring me completely. He's staring at the inferno. "Elisa?" he whispers. He starts walking back toward the fire. He's not running from the crime. He's running toward the only thing he loves. I watch, paralyzed, as he walks straight into the heat. He doesn't flinch as the embers land on his shoulders. He doesn't stop as the soles of his boots begin to smoke. He reaches the edge of the foundation, looks down into the glowing red pit of the basement, and he jumps. I waited until dawn. I sat in the woods, shivering, watching the smoke rise in a straight gray line toward the morning sun. The silence was absolute. No sirens, no neighbors, just the smell of burnt wood and something else, something sweet and heavy that I'll never be able to get out of my clothes. I walked back to the ruins once the sun was up. There was nothing left but the chimney, standing like a tombstone in the middle of a blackened scar on the earth. I didn't look for him. I didn't look for her. I walked to my car, my twisted ankles screaming, and I drove. I didn't call the police. I didn't stop at the hospital. I just drove until I reached the city, until the streets were crowded and the noise was deafening and the world was too loud to hear my own thoughts. Sometimes, at night, when the wind hit the vents in my apartment just right, I swear I can hear that low, guttural humming. And I realized that he was right about one thing. Eyes don't know how to keep secrets. I see her every time I close them. I see him standing in the fire. And the worst part isn't the memory of the body or the shears. The worst part is the realization that I'm still breathing the air he left behind. Air that tastes like iron and rot, and the family secret that I'll be carrying until the day the earth finally claims me too.